This is Crime in the Coconut, our true crime podcast. But this is October.
Oh my god, yeah, I forgot. It's my episode.
Oh, we had to restart. We had to introduce Scary Sunday.
Okay. Blah, 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 blah. Alright, so by now the cool, spooky music has played.
Welcome to Scary Sundays, folks.
This is your first scary episode.
Yes.
If you haven't listened to the trailer yet, what we're going to be doing for the month of October, instead of the usual true crime that we cover, we are going to focus solely on some of the scariest stories we could find. They can be paranormal, maybe they'll be cryptids, maybe there'll be aliens. We don't know yet. Well, I mean, we know yet, but you don't. So we're just trying to get into the spooky holiday spirit. We will also have a bonus episode this month on Halloween. We're not going to reveal what it is just quite yet, but it's going to be something special Amanda and I cook up for you. And it'll probably be a pretty long extra episode. So stay tuned for that. It's going to be fun. So, to get us started, I am covering one of the, in my opinion, one of the most famous scary American stories. And I feel like most people have at least heard of it, because it's kind of a pop culture thing now, I would venture to say.
All right.
Covering the Amityville Horror.
Wow.
Whee!
I know nothing about the Amityville Horror.
Have you seen the movies at all?
No.
Ooh.
Ghosts scare me.
Okay, so we're going to have to watch the Amityville Horror.
Okay.
Both the original and the 2006 Ryan Reynolds remake.
Ryan Reynolds?
Yeah, he was pretty good in that movie.
So, I don't like ghosts. I can handle, like, any kind of slasher scary movie or any kind of gore. I don't like ghosts because you can't stop a ghost.
That's right.
You can lock the door, you can do whatever you need, but if a ghost wants to poke your eyeball, it'll do it.
The Amityville, well, and we'll get into it at the end. The movies are an embellished version of what really happened, but they are still very scary. So, to kick this off, we got to start with really the beginning. So the Amityville Horror starts with the DeFeo family. They moved into 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, New York. The family consisted of the father, Ron DeFeo, the mother, Louise DeFeo, and the children, Ronald DeFeo Jr., 18-year-old Dawn, 13-year-old Allison, and 12-year-old Mark, and 9-year-old John Matthew. In the early morning of November 13th, 1974, Ronald DeFeo Jr. woke up, grabbed a .35 caliber gun from the home on Ocean Avenue, and shot his whole family in their beds while they slept.
How old is he?
He was 23.
Okay.
So, before diving into the horror part, the story that everybody knows, we're going to talk about what happened to Ron DeFeo Jr. leading up to him killing his whole family.
That's what I want to know.
Because what happened initially when he got caught was he touted right away that he heard spirits in the house in his voice telling him to kill his family.
Okay.
Okay? So, Ronald Butch DeFeo Jr. was born on September 26th in 1951 in Brooklyn, New York. He was the oldest of the 5 children in the DeFeo family. His father, Ronald Sr., worked at a Brooklyn Buick dealership, providing a good living for the family.
What year is this?
He was born in 1951. All these events happen in the 70s.
Okay.
The DeFeo murders happened in 74, and then the next family that experiences the horror moved in the following year.
Okay. All right.
Yep. Ronald Sr. was known to be, this is the father, was known to be very authoritative and domineering. He was known to have very hot-tempered fights with the mother, Louise, and with the children. The worst of his temper was often taken out on the oldest, Ron Jr.
This is the one that killed them.
Yes.
Okay.
It only made his life harder for him as he got older, as he was heavily bullied in school.
Yeah, that sounds like a concoction for murder.
Yep. As time went on, he began to physically act out, particularly against his father, of course. The family took him to a psychiatrist out of concern, but he swore he didn't need help, and the therapy did nothing. In place of this, the family started to bribe him with money and gifts for good behavior. Kind of like what you were talking about with Catherine being rewarded while she was still in school.
Yeah.
This, however, only made his behavior worse, and at 17, he became addicted to LSD and heroin and was expelled from school due to his violence.
Woof, what a concoction.
The family continued to try the reward system and got him a job with his father at the dealership. In addition to this, his father gave him a weekly stipend with no expectations in return. So not only is he getting paid from his job, his dad is just giving him money every week. Just to keep him behaved, but it's not working.
Yeah.
Ron Jr. instead used this money for the car that his parents gifted him to make repairs and upgrades. Well,
it's a hobby, I guess.
Yeah, but he also used it for guns, alcohol, and drugs.
Oh.
His behavior worsened at a rapid rate. He began threatening friends and even shot at his father during a fight at a point-blank range.
Oh.
But the gun jammed.
Oh, so he would have killed him right then.
He would have killed his father right then, but the gun jammed. By 1974, Ron Jr. became increasingly frustrated by his meager salary and devised a plan to begin embezzling money from the dealership. In late October of that year, 1974, he was to deposit upwards of $20,000 to the bank for the dealership. Ron Jr. planned a fake robbery with a friend, who he planned to split the money with.
A fake robbery?
Yeah, so like the friend would rob Ron DeFeo Jr., and then they would just run away with the money, and Ron would just say, well, I got robbed, and then they never find the robber.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm. The plan went perfectly, but then eventually the police obviously came to the dealership to question Ron Jr. because he's the guy that got robbed.
Right.
He refused to comply when they asked him to identify possible suspects, and when his father started to question why he's refusing to work with the police, Ron Jr. threatened to kill him again. A few weeks later, he killed his whole family in 15 minutes. He then showered after shooting all of his family members in their beds, dressed for work, took his bloody clothes and the gun in a pillowcase, and he then dumped them in a storm drain on his way to work at the dealership at 6 a.m. While at work, he called home pretending not to know why his father hadn't come into work, and then he left early to go see some friends. He made it a point to tell them he couldn't reach his family at home, so the friends went to the home after he called them that evening, feigning surprise at finding his family shot in their beds.
Okay, so he's creating an alibi.
Yes. The cops were called and began questioning Ron Jr. about possible suspects, and he immediately threw out a mafia hitman, Louis Fellini. So, here's the thing. You're telling everybody that you have no idea why your dad didn't show up for work, and then you have no idea why they're shot in their beds, but you immediately have a name.
And you'd be like, it's Robert.
Yeah.
It's him. It's that guy.
So he threw out mafia hitman Louis Fellini, citing an old grudge that he had with the family over a deal at the dealership. Ron Jr. said that he stayed up late watching TV and then left early for work. He said he believed his family was alive when he left. Then they placed him in protective custody as they searched for the suspect. As they searched the house, however, they discovered an empty ammo box under Ron Jr.'s bed that went to the Marlin gun used to kill the family.
Ooh, you covered some of them tracks, but not all of them.
They began to rearrange the timeline, realizing the family was still in their jammies and in bed, meaning...
Jammies.
I know, I literally wrote jammies, I'm sorry. Was still in their jammies and in bed, meaning the murders most likely happened in the early hours, therefore placing Ron Jr. at the house at the time of the murders, based on the timeline he had given them.
Oh, Ron.
Yeah. Once questioned about this, DeFeo began to change his story. At first, he said Fellini appeared in the house in those early hours, and an accomplice dragged DeFeo from room to room as Fellini shot his whole family, making him watch.
Okay, that doesn't make sense.
Nope. As he continued to spin his tale, he eventually broke down and said, "Once I started, I just couldn't stop. It went so fast." His trial did not start until a year later on October 14th of 1975. His attorney attempted the insanity plea, and DeFeo touted that he had heard voices in the house that told him to kill his family. A psychiatrist for the defense supported the claim, saying that DeFeo was neurotic and suffered from dissociative disorder. However, the psychiatrist for the prosecution proved that DeFeo suffered from antisocial personality, meaning that he was motivated by a self-centered attitude, but fully aware of his actions. Yeah. The jurors ended up agreeing with the assessment and found DeFeo guilty of 6 counts of second-degree murder, for which he was sentenced to 6 life terms. All of his appeals have been denied, and he is serving his time in the Green Haven Correctional Facility in Beckman, New York. In 2002, he recanted the Voices' testimony and said his parents were just abusive and that he killed them while high on heroin and while he was drunk.
That sounds more,
Yes.
more like it.
So I wanted to give... That is, like, how this all started. So keep that in the back of your mind. Like, these are the events that kicked off this becoming the most haunted house in America.
Okay.
So then, what happens is the Lutz family moves into the house after it sits vacant for 13 months. And in December of 1975, a little over a year after the murders, they move in. The family consisted of George and Kathy Lutz, who were newly married on July 4th of that same year, and Kathy's 3 kids from a previous marriage, whose names I did not write down, I'm sorry.
Is this, like, before the time where realtors had to disclose this kind of stuff to you?
They knew that this had happened. It was, like, national news. Everybody knew that this had happened in that house.
Was the house cheap because of it?
They did get it less expensive because of it.
Okay.
The furniture from the DeFeo family was still in the house, which the Lutz family paid an additional $400 for, leading the mortgage to be $88,000. This house is huge. It has a pool. It's situated on a creek, and it's beautiful. That is a very good price. The Lutz family only stayed in the home for 28 days after moving in.
$88,000?
Mm-hmm.
That's all they paid for it?
That's all they paid for it.
That's pretty good. I would consider it.
Yep, $88,000. They only stayed there for 28 days before fleeing in the middle of the night. The family stated that paranormal activity began immediately upon moving in. George Lutz reported that he would wake up every morning between 3 and 3:15 a.m., the witching hour, which is also the estimated time that the DeFeos were murdered.
So is Ron still alive at this point?
Yep, he's in jail.
Okay.
Yep. They also alleged that they had a massive fly problem, and when I say I mean, like, hundreds of flies, like swarms of flies, in the middle of winter in Long Island. Kathy Lutz said that she would have vivid dreams about the DeFeo murders almost nightly, and both she and George said that while they were awake, they would see a demon-like entity with parts of their heads missing, as if they had been shot.
Oh.
Kathy stated that there were also unseen entities that she could feel take over her body. George Lutz would wake up to the sound of a door slamming, though no one else in the house could hear it. He would also wake up in other places than his bed, though that's where he would fall asleep. So, like, he would wake up outside.
Like,
to the sound of a door slamming. Yeah.
Ooh. Ugh.
Yeah. The Lutz's daughter, Missy, had an imaginary friend named Jody. The parents originally could not see the friend, which is why they believed it was an imaginary friend, but eventually they did see it. It was an entity that resembled a demonic red-eyed pig. And when I say red-eyed, the eyes lit up like a red Halloween decoration. Like laser red eyes. Mm-hmm. One of the Lutz's sons was trying to open a window, but it wouldn't open for anyone. Like as if it were locked, but it wasn't. No one could open the window. But then suddenly it flew open. And so the son, they go over to the window to check it out. And the son rests his hands on the windowsill.
And it slams.
And it slams down, crushing both of his hands.
Oh.
They can't get it open again. They all try struggling to open the window. And then again, it just opens itself up. So Kathy takes the son down to the kitchen to try to treat his wounds before they take him to the hospital. But as he was sitting at the table, an entity appeared. And he said he felt it pass through him. And in a matter of a few blinks, his hands were fully healed as if they had never been wounded. Kathy recalls herself having red welts appear on her chest while she levitated about 2 feet above her bed. The whole family stated that green slime started to ooze from the walls, like in their hallways, and they had assumed that it was water damage, but when they had the house checked, there was absolutely no water damage at all, and there was no proof of it behind the walls.
Green slime?
Mm-hmm. Which is like ectoplasma. Is
that like a thing? Mm-hmm. Is ectoplasm like a real thing?
People say that it is.
What is it supposed to be?
Like physical energy, like
a manifestation of energy.
Yep. A crucifix that they had on their wall because they were a Catholic family, they said would regularly turn itself upside down. Like it would rotate and then it would just end up upside down. The morning of New Year's Day, they found large cloven hoof prints in the snow leading away from their house. And the final night, the Lutzes were in the house. The boys were in their beds, which were anchored to the floor, which I thought was weird, but it's like an old house. So, like, the beds were attached to the floor, like they were solid in the floor. While they were sleeping, the beds ripped themselves out of the floor and began levitating, slamming into one another. As the boys screamed for help, George woke up, but he said it was like an invisible force was like sitting on his chest, so he couldn't get out of bed, almost like it was sleep paralysis.
Mm-hmm.
He said he looked over to Kathy, seeing if she was going to get out of bed, but when he looked over, she was again levitating, and she had aged 90 years. He said she looked like a 90-year-old woman.
Oh.
But she still looked like herself.
Yeah.
That night, eventually it stops. All of a sudden, everything just stops. That night, they called a priest in to bless the house. And the priest himself claims that as he was sprinkling holy water in the house, a very masculine voice shouted, "Get out." Before leaving, he came down with a very high fever and developed blisters on his palms resembling stigmata.
What's that?
Ooh.
What is stigmata?
Stigmata is the marks of the crucifixion. And so people will come down with it, like, in the presence of all kinds of stuff. But it's very common, like, when there's true, like, evil or demonic presences. It's, like, the wounds of Christ will show up on their hands.
Oh.
Where the nails were. And it'll, like, show up on the feet sometimes, too. Sometimes people will get wounds on their head from the crown of thorns.
Oh, my gosh. I
Yeah.
didn't know that. Fun fact.
The Lutz family then left that night, and they never came back, and they sold the house with everything in it. So, this is what happened after the events. I found mixed reports on the claims of the Lutz family about other families being haunted after they fled. I did see some sources saying that the entity followed the Lutzes, and others claim that every family before and after the Lutzes were haunted as well. Not long after leaving the house, George and Kathy Lutz met with Jay Anson, who was a well-known writer of behind-the-scenes books about films and actors. So he did, like, the true story books. The Lutzes submitted a lengthy tape recording of the haunting to him, equaling about 45 hours worth of them telling this story. He used it to write the famous book, The Amityville Horror, which was published in 1977. Since its publishing, it has sold 11 million copies. The book was made into a movie in 1979. Keep in mind, they moved in and this happened to them in 1975. So this is all happening very fast.
Yeah, it's like catching fire.
It became the most successful independent movie in history. It made $86 million in 1979 money in the box office alone, with additional millions coming from video sales, syndication, etc. And the 2006 remake with Ryan Reynolds made even more than the original did. In the early 80s, another author met with the Lutzes and asked to write about their lives after the Amityville Horror, and they agreed, so Amityville Horror 2 was published in 1983, becoming another international bestseller. The story has been told so many times and in so many ways that it's hard to see the real story. Mm-hmm. What can be said is the original book by Jay Anson was, of course, slightly embellished, and it was only loosely based on the tapes that the Lutzes submitted. However, those tapes have never been released, and they may not be real. The Lutzes definitely didn't just... A lot of people think that they made it all up with some attorney for a big story, but they definitely didn't. An attorney who was deeply involved in the DeFeo murder case tried to sue them later, saying that they had just made the whole story up, that they wanted to make a quick buck, but he had no evidence to back up his claim, and it was dropped. Subsequently, the Lutzes stood by their story for the rest of their lives, and it absolutely never changed. Some of the kids are still alive, and they've been quoted in documentaries now, like they've done interviews, and like grown men now,
like, yes,
and they
happened.
like shake when they tell the story. They like cry about it, basically.
Well, yeah.
It's still so terrifying to them. In 1979, they both took a polygraph test about the events, and they both passed with flying colors.
The fact that they're being so willing to talk about it is great.
Yeah. In a documentary on the History Channel 25 years later, the story completely checked out the way they had told it the day it happened, and they stood by it completely. People have been trying to debunk the Amityville Horror since its inception, but it's proving fundamentally impossible to prove without a doubt that it's not true. Since the story is personal matters of perception... So this is a quote, actually, from one of my sources, AmityvilleNow.com. Because they said it so well, I didn't want to try to rewrite it.
Yeah.
Since the story is personal matters of perception and nightmares, the Lutzes can't be proven or disproven, only believed or disbelieved. True horror stories were, like the true horror story, like this is based on true events, were not moneymakers at the time that this happened. at the time of the Lutz's haunting, making it unlikely for them to predict the story's success. So there was nothing precedenting this for them to say, we should do this, we'll make a ton of money.
Right. It's not like after Twilight came out, everybody was like, let's write books about werewolves and vampires.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. The Lutzes didn't have a background either in film or production. They didn't come from this world. They wouldn't know, like, the first thing about how to make a successful story. They also did not become wealthy from the story's fame. While they did receive some royalties, it was never actually a ton of money, and it faded very quickly. They actually struggled financially for the rest of their lives, both as a family and individually, and George and Kathy ended up divorcing. The Cromartie family purchased the home in 1977 for much less than the Lutzes did. They stated that there were no broken fixtures, strange smells, or apparitions. But like I said, it was reported that the Lutzes claimed the haunting followed them. And they first made this statement even before the house sold. There has been no reported hauntings in the home since 1977. The house has been renovated and the address has been changed. So here are the three most common stances that people take on this story. One is that the Lutzes risked their livelihoods and their kids on a never-before-seen get-rich-quick scheme that failed.
Mm-hmm.
Second, the family suffered from mass hysteria or shared delusion despite having no previous mental health problems or any addictions.
Mm-hmm.
I have a little bit about that in a second. But then the third is the family was haunted by a force that drove them all mad, forcing them to flee, and then following them forever, never allowing them to recover. So back to the second theory that they suffered from mass hysteria. I did find, it wasn't enough for me to make like a whole big thing about it. I did find that it was said that George Lutz was into the occult. I don't know what specifically. And the kids do confirm in some documentaries that they did see their dad doing occultish things.
That's what I was going to say, because a lot of it sounds very demonic, like religion-based. And I was going to say, I'm surprised like they didn't have evidence of Ron doing occult stuff.
Yeah.
But it does sound like it almost like those murders were a coincidence, and maybe them moving into that house only fueled whatever was following them already.
Right. So I don't think it was mass hysteria that happened to them. I personally believe it did happen to them, because I don't think you stand by that story and ruin your lives if it didn't happen to you. Yeah. Whether it's something that would happen to everybody else or if it's something that genuinely just happened to them, it was very real for them.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. The kids, like I said that they saw occult things happening from their dad.
What sorts of occult things?
That's what I couldn't find. That's why I didn't make a whole thing about it, because I couldn't find enough information on what he was into. I think that a lot of times people, I was one of these people where I just heard, the DeFeo family moved in and he heard voices and so he shot his family. I didn't realize what really happened there. And so when you hear that, you hear, he heard voices, he shot his family, and then the next family moved in and all this horrible, awful stuff happened. You immediately think, well, that's why, because there was already a haunting in the house, when the real story is probably the family was haunted. The family had something attached to it.
Yeah, and
it just manifested in the house with the energy that was already left over from the murder.
Yes, the anguish and agony that Ron was going through that caused him to bring upon the anguish and agony that his family dealt with, like the murdering and that kind of stuff. Like, evil shit thrives on that. Yep. And especially, the family knew about it.
Yeah,
there was a lot of subconscious stuff going on as well.
They were, I don't want to say they were primed to have certain things happen, but they kind of were. So it was able to manifest to them in that way as well.
Yeah, because it'll know what you're going to be afraid of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I gotta take a drink, hold on.
Wet the palate a little bit.
It also just, I can smell the watermelon, and I'm like, I want it in my mouth. So anyway, I'm going to show you, before I get to, my final closing quotes, I want to show you, so they did have a bunch of people come in here, obviously. This was, like I said, it's one of the biggest paranormal stories in American history. It's completely changed the way Amityville is seen now. So they obviously had a bunch of people come in, and they were all skeptics. Every single person that came into the house was a skeptic.
Yeah.
It was a pretty large group of people, and a bunch of photos were taken, and they said nothing happened while they were there. But keep in mind, the Lutzes kept saying, it followed us. It's not there.
Yeah.
So they go in, they're looking for stuff. They took a bunch of pictures. one picture was captured. And if it is a true picture, and it has been scrubbed, it's not been edited, it's a genuine photo. If everybody that went there that evening says, we were all there when that picture was taken, nobody did anything, there was nobody else there. So if this picture is real,
okay,
it is considered the most concrete proof of ghost.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay.
I'm scared. You ever see Insidious?
That movie scares the shit out of me.
That's what this reminds me of.
That movie scares me.
And I think that movie does a really good job of, like, tackling the whole subconscious aspect of inviting evil into...
Yes.
That's why I never tried lucid dreaming.
I'm very scared.
Because I'd be that... Because I suffer from sleep paralysis, or I have suffered from it, and I'm going to be that idiot that lucid dreams and walks too far away from my body and watches some demon crawl inside.
Okay. So I'm going to cover these up because I don't want to spoil it. So this is the picture. Okay? This is just the picture.
Is it in the doorway?
Yeah.
Okay.
So then they obviously brightened it because they picked something up.
Uh-huh. Is there a close-up? You're making me nervous.
That's what's in the doorway. And it matches the picture of the youngest DeFeo boy.
Oh, I thought it was in the middle door. Go back to the other picture. Go to the first one. Oh my god. That is so realistic.
I know. Here, you can unplug it.
How did they even see that?
Yeah. Well, because it goes through, like they scrub it. They search for irregularities in the shapes, and then they brighten the image.
Holy
shit. And it's
shit.
been verified, like, it's not an edited photo. It's a real picture.
And the people that were in there, like, none of them were children?
And they swear up and down there was not a kid present. Everybody in the group. And they're all skeptics. So if this is a real photo...
And the eyes are glowing, too.
Yeah.
And they say demons always appear as children, too.
Yep. Mm-hmm. So when I saw that picture...
Oh my god.
I'm a pretty skeptical person because I personally don't believe in intelligent ghosts. Like, I think if you're seeing somebody, it's residual energy.
I think, yeah, that would be my theory,
but
too.
But I do believe in demons.
Yeah, that one seems really, like, intentional.
Yeah. So what I personally think, my personal theory on this is that there wasn't anything in the house originally. And then these brutal DeFeo murders happened. And there was a black stain left on the house. And a black energy left on the house. Because energy doesn't die. Mm-hmm. And then the Lutzes moved in. And whether the alleged occult activity had anything to do with it or not, the Lutz family had something already with them. Something about them. And it all just, it was like a nasty marriage.
I don't know how, like, residual energy works, but, you know, children are deemed to be, like, more attuned to that kind of stuff. And if a kids don't know what death are.
Thank you. Yeah.
What death are.
What
kids
death
don't
are.
know what death is.
I speak English good.
If this kid, in what order did he kill that family? Do you know?
You know what? I think I think he went in and killed his parents first, and then he went in and killed his siblings. They were all face down in their bed. The other weird thing about this, to add to, like, the supernatural, if you want to think there was anything supernatural about the DeFeo murders, is the neighbors. He shot 5 people in the middle of the night. None of the neighbors said they heard gunshots. Only the dog barking. There was not a silencer on the gun.
Okay, this is another, like, little snippet into why I think all this happened. If, you know, let's say these kids didn't know anything about death, and they hear their parents getting shot, and they think this is their first sliver of, I'm gonna die. They couldn't pass on because they didn't know what passing on was. They never thought about it before.
So it's stuck there.
And it's some kind of, like, purgatory. And I'm sure that demon, you know, probably found... I'm speaking in, like, a way that it makes sense. Not that I think this is exactly how it happened.
Just how your brain is able to process it.
Yeah, but that demon found this kid still stuck there and was like,
yep,
I can use this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, like, the Lutz family later said, like you said, the eyes are glowing and demons are often seen as children. That's why if you ever see a kid ghost and it's interactive, that is not a ghost.
Yeah, do not
mess with that. But anyway, that the Lutz's daughter, Missy, the little girl, had an imaginary friend that she believed was a kid, that she was playing with another kid.
Yeah.
But when the parents saw it, it was a demonic pig. I believe the Lutzes went through something. I think there was something there. I think there was leftover energy, and the Lutzes had something, and it just left with them. I don't know if the Lutzes fed it so much that that's why it stayed with them.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Did they ever explain as to how it followed them, or they just experienced misfortune?
I think it was experiencing the misfortune. I know the kids and Kathy kept having the dreams about the murders. Even after they left the house, they kept seeing the same things that they were seeing before. Like the apparitions, the images of people with their heads shot through, like the demonic images. They never stopped seeing them. It plagued them for the rest of their lives.
Woo!
I'd just look at it again, because this is considered one of the most concrete pieces of proof that an afterlife exists, that the supernatural exists.
If that ever happened to me,
and the fact that it looks just like the little DeFeo boy that died.
If that ever happened to me, I would kill myself. If I could not get away from a demon, and I know that's like only feeding the negative energy, which would probably be...
That's what the demon wanted, I'm sure.
Yeah, would maybe stop me from doing it. But I don't really believe in like an afterlife. I think everything just goes dark afterwards. Mm-hmm. It's like sleeping. Hopefully, that's what I hope would happen. But god damn, I'd be terrified to die and terrified to live if that happened to me.
Terrified to get stuck in the middle too. Terrified to be stuck in the middle.
Would only you being terrified to live or terrified to die was probably what's going to get you stuck in the middle anyways.
Exactly. They were living through hell. So, as a skeptic, how do you feel about the story? Do you think they really went through it? And how do you feel about that picture?
The picture's scary, for sure. I want to believe it, but I take a lot of things with a grain of salt.
Definitely.
So
when I learned about the DeFeo murders and what really happened to him, I was like, oh, that changes how I feel about this story.
I think your subconscious can be very powerful, and if the dad was already dealing with some kind of occult stuff, mm-hmm. and they already had the impressionism of, there was a murder here... I would think, yeah, they could probably experience some kind of shared mass hysteria of these things happening. Mm-hmm. But, and yes, that trauma could follow them throughout the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
But the picture...
That's some scary shit.
But again, the skeptic in me is like, unless I take that picture and I know for a fact nothing was there and nothing happened, then I'm not going to really 100% believe it.
I think it's interesting that a group of skeptics went in there. They said nothing happened while they were there. Absolutely nothing. And then they come back with that picture.
And it's almost like it was watching them, you know? It's like keeping an eye out. So maybe it didn't want to do anything while they were there.
Because it wanted to further fucking with people's heads.
And like, I don't think that, if demons and all that shit are real, I don't think they're, perfect beings. Like animals. Like animals, everyone wants to think like they have the super ultra instinct, and when there's a flood, they're gonna move to high ground. And yes, that might be the case
for most of them.
But animals do dumb shit all the time too.
My cat runs into walls regularly.
Yeah, and like nothing's a failsafe. So, do I think that demon intentionally wanted to be captured? No. Do I think it accidentally was? Yes.
Oh, about animals. I can't believe I didn't put that in there. The Lutzes had a dog, and the dog would be on its leash, its chain outside, and where its chain was in relation to the fence in the yard, if the dog were to jump over it, it would hang itself. Eventually, like it would die. And the dog kept doing that over and over and over again. They would throw it back over the fence, and he would immediately start doing it again. And he did that the whole time they were there.
Ugh.
Yeah. I can't believe I'm so glad you brought up animals. I can't believe I forgot to put that in there.
Yeah, that's like I'll bring it up again, my paranoia.
Yeah.
That's why I don't have it anymore. It's not nearly as bad as it used to be, but that's why I would like to have animals, because I was like,
they can pick up on stuff.
I would think if something is happening, they will alert me.
Yeah, in some way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think people hear the Amityville horror and they think it was a bunch of ghosts. But it wasn't. It wasn't ghosts. It wasn't the DeFeo family left there to haunt them. It was something more sinister.
Yeah.
Just using what was available in the house.
Yeah.
And that picture scares the hell out of me. The first time I saw that picture, it totally changed how I viewed the story. Because I didn't know any of this. I just knew the movies, like everybody else.
I don't want to watch that movie.
And the movies and the books, like I said, they have completely masked what the story really was. Mm-hmm. And I think the real story is even scarier. So that's not 100% just spooky. There was some true crime at the beginning, but it was an important part of the story.
Oh, ignorance is bliss. I don't want to watch the movie. I don't want to think about it.
It's pretty scary. I'm not going to lie to you. So I'm going to close with a couple quotes. The first quote is from the Cromartie family, which is the family that purchased the home after the Lutzes, and I believe the family still owns the home. So in response to whether or not they believe the Amityville horror really happened, they said, and it's a little bit mean, but I'm going to read it. The quiet village of Amityville, Long Island, has been made infamous by a hoax. It will possibly never be the same. It is Long Island's equivalent of Watergate. None of us would be here today if a responsible publisher and author had not given credibility to two liars and allowed them the privilege of putting the word true on a book in which is all actually a novel. The credibility of the hoax stems from using a charlatan Catholic priest who has been banned from performing his religious duties by the Diocese of Rockville Center, the equivalent of disbarment of a lawyer. This charlatan priest has been involved with a complicity to a lie and therefore deserves no credibility and should be dealt with accordingly. So I couldn't find anything about whether the priest that had claimed stigmata had really been refused. I didn't care to look into it too much. But something I want to point out is they said, none of us would be here today if a responsible publisher and author had not given credibility to two liars. Jay Anson himself came out and said, this is just based on the story. The Lutzes said, the book and the movies embellish it. It's not all true. That's not the real story. Mm-hmm. So for you to say that the author and publisher were the responsible ones and that the Lutzes were the ones that were the liars, they're not the ones that wrote the book.
Yeah.
So I think that's a bit unfair. But at the same time, I could see the Cromartie family being really fucking tired of people asking them about living in the haunted house of America.
Yeah.
And coming out with this, like, I hate those fucking Lutzes. Look at what I have to live with now.
Right.
But you also bought the house.
Yeah. And that's feeding into the, maybe it was a money-making scheme before its time.
Mm-hmm. And it just failed because it didn't make anything off of it.
And it failed because maybe they were like, hey, we're doing this thing. If this priest was already pretty discredited,
right,
like, just lie a little bit. You'll be famous for being the priest that checked out our house.
Yep.
I think I would be more intimidated by the story if there were other stories like it.
Right. But at the same time, I think what is so, like, unsettling, if you want to go on a more believed route, is that they were the only people that it happened to. There was this horrible, gruesome murder, and then they were haunted by it for the rest of their lives. And they had nothing to do with it.
Yeah. But also situations like that happen all the time. Right. All the time. And there's tons of things that evil entities could feed on. There's people that even indulge it.
Yep.
And still nothing happens.
Yep. So if it's real, it was just the right concoction of stuff.
Yeah.
To happen at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
If it's not, this was a truly complicated and multi-leveled scheme. And I'm surprised it didn't work out because it was so thought out if it's a scheme.
Yeah.
They covered all their bases if this was totally fake.
Yes.
And they lost money on the house. The Cromartie family bought it for thousands less than what they did. So that started their financial turmoil. Which I could see them being like, we're going to make millions off this story. Who cares if we lose the house? But then they never came back from it.
Mm-hmm.
So who knows? But I want to end on a quote from George Lutz. This was in that documentary from the History Channel 25 years after the events took place. He said, I believe this has stayed alive because it's a true story. It doesn't mean that everything that has ever been said about it is true. It's certainly not a hoax. It's real easy to call something a hoax. I wish it was. It's not. And that is the Amityville Horror. I want you to watch the movie. It's so good.
There was another one, Sinister. Mm-hmm. Sinister was really scary, too.
Sinister was scary. Insidious, I just said this to my friend Jesse the other day, because he's a big horror movie person, too. We both love Stephen King.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, we were talking about some of the scariest movies. in our opinion, and I said Insidious 1, because I haven't seen the others.
Mm-hmm.
Insidious 1 is one of the scariest movies I've ever watched. That and the movie Mirrors. That scene, any scene where the demon pops up, the red-faced demon.
The one where it's right behind him.
Where it's right behind him or where it's dancing in the house.
Uh-huh.
And that fucking Tulip song. I hate that song.
Love when scary movies, like, don't beat around the bush. They're like, oh, we're not going to make you imagine what this thing looks like.
Here's what it is.
We're going to put it right out, and that's what you have to look at. And that's what's
when that medium chick goes into the room and she's like staring terrified at the blackness in the ceiling.
Yeah.
I wanted to cry. Because it felt so real.
Yeah.
Terrifying.
Yes, yes.
And I love scary movies. I've seen a
chills.
lot. And that movie, like, I watch it in the daytime, because it's one of my favorite movies, so I've seen it a couple times. And I watch it in the daytime, and I'm still, like, on my couch, covered up with all my blankets, like, nothing can touch me. I am supreme, because it scares the shit out of me. The first Conjuring movie was also pretty scary.
I don't think I watched The Conjuring.
Which, The Conjuring is loosely based on the Amityville Horror.
I thought so.
Yes.
What about The Haunting in Connecticut?
I forget what that's based off of.
Is it The Conjuring or The Haunting in Connecticut where, like, the trailer was a kid, like, barfing at the table? And
that's The
like,
Haunting in Connecticut.
I didn't watch it for that reason.
It's very scary.
Yeah.
It is very scary. I forgot to mention that the Warrens actually did come to this house, too. Do you know who the Warrens are?
No.
They are the most respected, well, they are both deceased now, so they were the most respected paranormal investigators in the world. So they had the Annabelle doll. They had a museum in their basement where they kept, like, some of the most haunted objects. Why? Yeah.
Why would you do that?
Okay. But it was Ed and Lorraine Warren, and Lorraine Warren was a medium. And she was considered one of the most powerful. And she went into this house, and she herself said that of all the places she had ever been, this was the closest to hell she ever felt.
Are they Amityville?
Yeah. So take from that what you will. I know some people don't believe in mediums, but the Warrens are, like I said, the most respected paranormal investigators in the world.
I know we talked about, like, doing vlogs and going to stay at, like, Civil War Airbnbs and stuff. I think that'd be fun. If you ever ask me to go to a place like Amityville and sleep there.
I want to go to the...
I'm quitting.
I want to go to the Lizzie Borden house. Do you know what that is?
It sounds familiar.
Lizzie Borden, well, okay. She's dead, so I'm going to just say it. People believe her dad and her stepmother ended up being axed to death in the home. And she was charged with it, but then she was acquitted, and nobody was ever actually charged with the murder. Mm-hmm. So the story goes that Lizzie axed her parents and got away with it. But that house still exists, and it's a bed and breakfast now. And the furniture that they died on is still there.
I think I have seen a video on it, because Lizzie Borden sounds like a very familiar name.
One of my favorite podcasts went and did, like, a recording while they were in the Lizzie Borden house, and they, like, the host of the podcast is a skeptic. She's an autopsy tech, she's very scientific, and she said she was very uncomfortable in that house. Mm. Like, there were places she didn't want to be in. So I want to go so bad.
I'll go, but I ain't sleeping there. Alright, if I'm sleeping there, I want to be like blackout drunk.
Okay, that's fine. We can do that. That's fine. But I guess, like, there's rules. Like, they give you rules when you go there because they give you a tour of everything. Mm. It's so fucked up because the couch where her dad died, they have a picture of the crime scene above that couch of him, like, because you can just find it on Google. Yeah. But they go through and they tell you, like, you have to be careful what you say about the dad. Like, you can't, like, say he was frugal or cheap because, like, it'll upset the energy.
Okay, maybe I shouldn't be drunk because I'm going to start shit-talking.
You'll start shit-talking them all. But, yeah, like, you have to be careful what you say because it will disturb the energies there. And everybody that works there, like, believes in it. And
I feel like we're pretty respectful people.
I agree. So, yeah, that's my horror story. Mm. I wanted to cover the skeptic side of it and the believable side of it. Give both sides of the coin so it's fair. I didn't just want to go based off the movie because the movie's not accurate. Yes. So there you have it. The complete coverage of what happened to the DeFeo and the Lutz families at 112 Ocean Avenue, Amityville, New York.
Thank you for that, Ashley.
You're welcome. And thus kicks off our Scary Sundays.
Yeah. Thanks for coming to the first Scary Sunday.
Hope it was scary enough for you.
Leave a comment, leave a review. If we stick with doing this, we're going to make this a yearly thing. October is going to be...
And there will be fresh designs for merch every October.
It'll be the thing to look forward to.
Yes.
Throughout the year.
Agreed. We may even turn it into a summerween thing, too.
Yes, twice a year.
Yeah. So...
biannual.
Yes. To keep up with Scary Sundays, you can find us at...
Crime in the Coconut on Instagram. You can also email us at crimeinthecoconut@gmail.com. And we have a Twitter. That is CITC Podcasts.
She did it!
Yay. Okay, I didn't fuck it up this time.
I know. I love when you do that.
I was ready for that, too. I was like, I better say the plugs this time. I wanted to give a shout out to my dad. Because he started listening to the podcasts.
Oh, my dad doesn't even listen.
And he, will text me and, give a little input. He's like, I just listened to the Pizza Bomber. That is a really wild, whatever. He,
Aww.
And then he told me about his cousin who was stabbed in a drug deal. And he was like, my cousin got stabbed in a drug deal one time, and there was some, stuff that happened. And I was like, I'll give it a shout out, but I don't think that's article worthy.
We'll look it up. Maybe we can give a little,
I'm not looking it up.
I'll look it up. I'm here for you. Give me a name. I'll figure it out. Wow. But see, that's a good example of a listener story. If you were to write out the whole story for us, a little blurb, we'd absolutely turn that into an episode if we could get a couple other people to do that.
Yeah.
And share, your true crime stories. I know I have some that I've submitted to other podcasts, so send us stuff. We like when you guys send us things. And like Amanda said, rate and review on iTunes if that's where you listen, which is where most of you do. Yeah. Welcome to Scary Sundays. Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween, folks.
Such are the autumn people. Beware of them.